My brother gave my daughter a puppy knowing she's terrified of dogs. I gave his son something worse. My daughter Lily was 6 years old and had been terrified of dogs since she was 3 when a neighbor's retriever knocked her down and stood over her barking. She'd hit her head on the concrete and needed stitches. The dog hadn't bitten her, just scared her, but the trauma stuck. For 3 years we'd been working with a child psychologist and keeping our home dog-free. Everyone in the family knew about Lily's fear because we'd had to leave 2 family gatherings when someone brought their dog unannounced. My brother Derek thought this was ridiculous. He said we were raising a weak child who couldn't handle normal life. He had a son named Connor who was 7, and according to Derek, Connor was tough because Derek didn't baby him. At every family dinner, Derek would make comments about Lily needing to toughen up. He'd say things about how kids today were too soft, and when he was young, nobody had phobias because parents didn't allow it. My wife would tell him to stop, but Derek would just laugh and say he was being honest. Lily's 7th birthday was coming up, and I made it clear to everyone that it was princess-themed. No animals, no surprises that involved pets, definitely no dogs. I sent a text to the family group chat reminding them about Lily's phobia and asking them to be mindful of gifts. Everyone responded with understanding. Derek sent back a thumbs-up emoji. The day of the party, Derek showed up late, carrying something in a large box with holes punched in the side. He had this smug expression when he walked into our backyard where 20 kids were playing. He said he'd brought the perfect gift that would change Lily's life forever. My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was a hamster or something manageable. Lily opened her other presents first and was having the time of her life. Then Derek insisted she open his gift next. He set the box down in front of her and told her to be very careful because it was alive and special. Lily opened the box, and a golden retriever puppy jumped out. She screamed and fell backwards off her chair, hitting her head on the patio. The puppy, excited and energetic, bounded toward her while she was on the ground. Lily was hyperventilating so badly she couldn't breathe. I grabbed the puppy and shoved it at Derek while my wife carried Lily inside. She threw up in the bathroom and couldn't stop shaking for over an hour. Several parents took their kids home early because the party had turned into chaos. Derek stood there, saying this was exactly what Lily needed, that exposure therapy was a real thing, and we were overreacting. He said the puppy was a purebred and cost him $1,500 with all the supplies. He said the breeder told him puppies were perfect for helping kids overcome fears. My father told Derek to leave immediately. Derek said we were raising a damaged child, and someday we'd thank him for trying to fix her. He took the puppy and left, but not before telling the remaining parents that we were ruining Lily's development. Lily had nightmares every night for weeks. She wouldn't go in the backyard where it happened. She started having panic attacks at school when kids talked about their dogs. Her therapist said this had set back 18 months of progress. I was beyond furious with Derek. That's when I learned something interesting about Connor from my mother. Connor was terrified of the dark. Not just uncomfortable, but completely terrified of being in darkness without light sources nearby. Derek had mentioned it once years ago, saying Connor had watched some horror movie at a friend's house when he was 5 and developed this fear. My mother said Derek kept nightlights in every room and avoided taking Connor anywhere after sunset. Derek had even skipped family camping trips because Connor couldn't handle sleeping in the dark woods. Perfect. I waited 6 weeks until Derek's wife invited us to Connor's 8th birthday party at their house. The whole family would be there. I bought something special for Connor. Not just any gift, but an elaborate escape room experience voucher. The company specialized in horror-themed rooms that were pitch black, with only brief flashes of light. I'd called ahead and specifically requested their Midnight Maze package, which locked participants in complete darkness for 15 minutes before any lights activated. I wrapped it in expensive paper with a big bow. At the party, I gave Connor his gift after he'd opened several toys from other relatives. I said it was an adventure he'd never forget, something really special for a big kid turning 8. Derek wasn't paying attention because he was busy grilling burgers. Connor opened the package and read the description on the voucher. His face went pale. The card explained he'd be locked in a room in total darkness while scary sounds played. Connor started crying quietly, trying not to make a scene. He dropped the voucher and ran inside the house. The crying got louder until everyone could hear it from the backyard. Derek came over holding his spatula and picked up the voucher. His face turned bright red as he read it. He shoved it at me and said I knew about Connor's fear. I said I had no idea, and the escape room company said it was the most popular experience for kids his age. I said maybe this was good exposure therapy. I said Connor needed to face his fears instead of being coddled. I repeated every single thing Derek had said at Lily's party, using his exact words and tone. The other parents were watching and whispering. Someone asked why Derek was so upset about an adventure voucher. Another parent said their kid loved escape rooms, and maybe Connor just needed to toughen up. Derek tried to explain about Connor's fear, but it sounded exactly like what he'd mocked us for with Lily. He ended up canceling the rest of the party and taking Connor inside while the kid was still sobbing. We left along with most of the other guests within 20 minutes. The next week, Derek called me. He was screaming before I even said hello. His voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He called me a vindictive bastard who deliberately traumatized his son. He said I knew exactly what I was doing, and there was no excuse for giving that nightmare voucher to a child with a documented fear. He kept saying I'd traumatized Connor on purpose. And what kind of father does that to his own nephew? His words came out fast and angry, barely pausing for breath. I could hear him crying between the yelling, these harsh, gasping sounds that should have made me feel guilty, but mostly just made me feel satisfied. I let him rant for about 3 minutes before I interrupted in a calm voice. I told him the escape room company said it was their most popular package for children. I said, maybe Connor just needs some exposure therapy to toughen up instead of being babied his whole life. I used Derek's exact words from Lily's party, the same dismissive tone he'd used while my daughter was throwing up in the bathroom. The silence on the other end lasted about 10 seconds. Then Derek started crying harder and saying this was completely different because Connor's fear came from real trauma. He said Connor had seen actual horror movie images that scared him, not like Lily, who was just being dramatic about a friendly puppy that wouldn't hurt anyone. He went on about how we made Lily's fear worse by protecting her from everything instead of teaching her resilience. I felt this twisted satisfaction hearing him make excuses that sounded exactly like what he'd dismissed about my daughter. Every word out of his mouth was the same logic I'd tried to use at Lily's party while he rolled his eyes and called us overprotective. My wife walked into the room and saw my face. She stopped and stared at me holding a laundry basket. She didn't ask who was on the phone or try to take it from me. She just set the basket down and sat on the couch next to me, her hand on my shoulder. Derek's voice got louder again, demanding I apologize to Connor right now. He said if I didn't admit what I did was wrong, he'd turn the whole family against me. He'd tell everyone what kind of person I really was, someone who hurts innocent children for revenge. He said Connor was having panic attacks and couldn't sleep alone, and it was all my fault. I waited until he finished and then told him in that same calm voice that I'd apologize when he apologized to Lily for the puppy. We both knew that was never happening. The silence stretched out again, and I could hear his breathing, these short, angry sounds. Then he started yelling again, but I pressed the end button in the middle of his sentence. The phone went quiet in my hand, and I just sat there. My whole body felt like it was vibrating, this weird combination of triumph and nausea. My wife squeezed my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I opened my mouth to say yes, but realized I didn't actually know the answer. I heard footsteps, and then Lily's voice asking what the yelling was about. She stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her hair in 2 braids, her eyes wide and worried. I had to decide right then whether to tell her the truth about what I did to Connor. For a second I almost said it, almost explained that I'd given her cousin something scary on purpose to teach Derek a lesson. But then I looked at her face and couldn't make myself say the words. I told her it was just adult stuff, and she should go back to watching her show. She stood there for another moment, then walked back to the living room. I sat protecting my daughter from knowing her father became someone cruel. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept replaying Connor's face in my head, that pale, terrified expression when he read the voucher description. I remembered exactly how he looked when he understood he'd be locked in darkness. The memory played over and over. It looked exactly like Lily's face when she saw the puppy, the same terror and betrayal. That thought made my chest feel tight. The next morning, my mother called before I finished my first cup of coffee. She said Derek had been texting the entire family about what I did. He'd sent long messages explaining how I deliberately traumatized Connor with that voucher because I couldn't handle conflict like an adult. My mother's voice sounded tired and disappointed. She said half the relatives were saying I went too far, and the other half were saying Derek had it coming after what he did to Lily. The family was splitting into sides, and everyone was fighting in the group chat. My father posted something about both of us being wrong, and 3 people attacked him immediately. My mother asked me what I was thinking, and I didn't have a good answer. My sister showed up around noon holding 2 coffees. She walked past me into the kitchen without waiting for an invitation and set the cups on the counter. She looked at me directly and asked if I felt good about what I did. Her voice wasn't angry, just curious and sad. I told her I felt like I finally stood up for my daughter after months of Derek making her feel weak and broken. But my voice didn't sound as confident as I wanted it to. My sister looked at me over her coffee cup and waited. She told me she understood why I did it. But Connor was going to have nightmares now, just like Lily does. The question hung there between us about whether hurting another kid was really the answer. I felt my face get hot and told her she didn't understand what it was like watching your child suffer. She set down her cup and said she understood perfectly fine, but that didn't make what I did okay. I stood up and started unloading the dishwasher, even though I'd already done it, because I needed something to do with my hands. She asked if making Connor scared helped Lily feel any better, and I didn't have an answer for that. The coffee got cold while we sat there not really talking anymore. Finally, she said she had to go pick up her kids. The next day, Lily's therapist called while I was at work. She needed to reschedule the appointment and mentioned she'd heard there was another incident at a family event. Her voice was careful, not judgmental, but I could hear the question underneath. I told her Thursday worked fine, and she said okay. After we hung up, I realized word was spreading through the family fast. Everyone would know exactly what kind of person I'd become. My hands shook while I typed an email to a client. My phone rang again, an hour later. My mother's voice sounded exhausted when I answered. She said she needed to tell me something about Connor. Connor had been sleeping in Derek's bed every night since the party and wouldn't go near his own room. He kept saying he could feel the darkness watching him, even though nothing had actually happened yet. The voucher hadn't even been used. My stomach dropped hearing how similar it sounded to Lily's trauma. My mother asked if I knew why Connor got so upset at the party, and I lied and said I didn't realize it would be that bad. She sighed and said the whole family was worried about both kids now. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the parking lot staring at nothing for 20 minutes. I tried to make myself feel better by remembering Lily's birthday party. Derek stood there while she hit her head and shook, and he showed no remorse at all. He called her weak and said we were ruining her development. But the memory didn't help. The justification felt thinner now that I knew Connor was suffering the same way Lily did. Derek posted something on social media that afternoon. It was vague, but obviously about me, talking about family betrayal and people showing their true colors. I watched the comments pile up with relatives saying they supported him and asking if he was okay. He was building a story where he was the victim and I was the villain. My cousin left a supportive comment. My uncle asked what happened. Derek replied saying, "Some people can't handle honest feedback about their parenting." I wanted to comment back, but knew it would make everything worse. 2 weeks went by with no contact from Derek. The family group chat stayed quiet, except for my mother posting pictures of her garden. Then Derek's wife called my wife one evening while we were making dinner. I could hear my wife's side of the conversation from the kitchen. She was suggesting we all meet to talk things through. My wife looked at me and asked if I was willing to sit down with them. I said yes, even though the idea made me feel sick. We set it up for Saturday at a neutral restaurant. I spent the next 4 days feeling anxious about it. Saturday came, and we got there first. Derek and his wife showed up 10 minutes late. The tension was immediate. We ordered food, but nobody ate much. Derek's wife tried to mediate and suggested we both acknowledge we'd hurt each other's kids and move forward. But Derek interrupted before I could answer. He said what I did was calculated and on purpose, while he was genuinely trying to help Lily. His voice got louder, and people at other tables started looking. I told Derek that bringing a live puppy to a birthday party when everyone knew about her fear wasn't help. I said it was cruel, and he knew it would hurt her. Derek leaned back and said he really thought it would cure her. He said the breeder told him that exposure to puppies works, and he spent serious money on that dog. I almost believed he was confused about his own actions. His wife put her hand on his arm and asked him to lower his voice. Derek leaned forward, and his voice dropped to something sharp. He said, "I needed to admit what I did, to say out loud that I picked that voucher on purpose because I knew it would terrify Connor." I sat there with my hands in my lap, not looking at him, not saying anything. The silence stretched out, and I could feel everyone at nearby tables pretending not to listen. My wife shifted in her seat next to me. Derek kept staring at me, waiting for me to confess. If I said yes, I'd have to accept that I hurt a 7-year-old kid on purpose. But we both already knew what I'd done. Derek's face got redder, and he said my silence proved everything. His wife put her hand on his arm, but he pulled away. My wife finally spoke up and tried to change the subject. She said, "Maybe we should talk about how to help both kids going forward, how to make sure they felt safe at family events." Derek cut her off. He said there wouldn't be any coordinating because he wasn't bringing Connor anywhere near us anymore. He said I'd proven I was dangerous and he wouldn't risk his son's safety around me. That word hit me hard. Dangerous. I'd never thought of myself that way before, but maybe it fit. I deliberately scared a child badly enough to give him panic attacks. That seemed like something a dangerous person would do. Derek's wife tried to calm him, but he pushed his chair back. He said we were done, and there was nothing left to discuss. We all walked out without finishing our food. The parking lot was bright with afternoon sun. Derek and his wife went to their car without saying goodbye. My wife and I drove home in silence for the first 10 minutes. I stared out the window watching houses go by. Everything looked normal out there. People mowing lawns and washing cars. My wife kept her eyes on the road. I thought about asking her if she thought I was dangerous too, but I was scared of what she might say. We pulled into our driveway and sat there for a minute. I wondered if getting revenge on Derek had been worth losing him and Connor permanently, worth becoming someone my own family might fear. The answer felt like no, but I couldn't take it back now. 3 weeks later, Lily's therapist called and asked if I could come in for a meeting without Lily. My stomach dropped because I figured she'd heard about the family drama. I spent the drive to her office rehearsing excuses. When I got there, she smiled and asked me to sit. She said she wanted to talk about Lily's progress. Lily had been doing well lately, working through her fear responses and using her coping strategies. Then she said something that made me freeze. She told me Lily had mentioned at her last session that her cousin Connor got scared at his birthday party. Lily said she felt bad for Connor because she knew what it was like to be really scared of something. The therapist said it showed Lily was developing empathy and emotional awareness, good signs for her healing. I sat there trying to keep my face normal while shame burned through me. My 7-year-old daughter felt sorry for her cousin while I'd been busy planning revenge. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept thinking about what the therapist said, how Lily showed empathy for Connor's fear. She was being a better person at 7 than I'd managed to be as an adult. Lily understood what Connor was going through because she'd lived through the same terror. She didn't want him to hurt, but I'd deliberately caused that hurt to prove a point to Derek. I'd used a child's phobia as a weapon in an adult fight. My daughter was showing more emotional growth than I was. At the next therapy session, I asked to talk to the therapist after Lily's appointment. She sent Lily out to the waiting room and asked what was on my mind. I couldn't quite make myself say what I'd done out loud. Instead, I asked her a different question. I said, hypothetically, if a parent did something they regretted while trying to protect their child, did that make them a bad person? She looked at me for a long moment. She said parents sometimes make choices they later regret when they're in protective mode. She said the real question wasn't whether the choice was right or wrong, but what we do with that knowledge afterward. Do we learn from it and try to be better, or do we keep justifying it? I nodded and thanked her. On the drive home, I kept thinking about her question. What was I going to do with the knowledge that I'd hurt Connor on purpose? November came, and my mother called. She said she was hosting Thanksgiving, and both Derek and I were expected to come. She said it was important for family unity. Her voice had that tone that meant she wasn't asking. I agreed, because you don't say no to my mother when she uses that voice, but my stomach twisted at the thought. The whole next week, I felt sick thinking about Thanksgiving. Connor and Lily would both be there. I'd have to see what I'd done to Connor, see the fear in his eyes. Thanksgiving Day came and we got to my mother's house on time. Cars filled the driveway and I recognized Derek's among them. We went inside and the house smelled like turkey and stuffing. Family members were scattered through the rooms. I spotted Derek right away standing near the fireplace with Connor pressed against his side. Connor looked smaller than I remembered, thinner with dark circles under his eyes. Those circles looked exactly like the ones Lily had after her birthday party. Connor's eyes met mine for just a second before he looked away fast and moved closer to Derek. Derek wrapped his arm around Connor's shoulders and they moved to a different room. I felt my throat get tight watching them. Lily found the dessert table within 5 minutes. She grabbed a cookie, then noticed Connor standing with Derek across the room. She walked over and said something about the pumpkin pie. Just normal kid conversation. Connor's whole body went stiff, and he took a step back. He shook his head and turned away, pressing his face into Derek's side. Lily stood there looking confused and hurt. She came back to me and asked why Connor didn't want to talk to her. I told her he was probably just shy today and she should give him space. But I knew the real reason. Connor was scared of me, and by extension, scared of my daughter. That was my fault. Watching Lily get rejected by her cousin because of what I'd done felt worse than anything Derek had said. Dinner was awkward and tense. Derek and I sat at opposite ends of the table and didn't speak at all. The tension made everyone uncomfortable. My uncle tried to make a joke halfway through the meal about how families that fight together stay together. Nobody laughed. The silence after stretched out painfully. Connor barely ate anything, just pushed food around his plate. Lily kept glancing at him, wanting to try talking again, but didn't. I cut my turkey into smaller pieces without eating much. After dinner, I walked through the hallway looking for the bathroom and past my mother's study. The door was half open, and I saw Connor sitting in the big chair by the window with a book. He wasn't reading it, just staring at the pages. His legs were tucked up under him, and he looked so small. I stopped in the doorway and watched him. He didn't notice me at first. I wanted to say something. Wanted to tell him I was sorry for what I did at his party. The words were right there in my throat. But saying sorry would mean admitting I knew exactly what I was doing when I bought that voucher. It would mean admitting I wanted to scare him on purpose, and I wasn't ready to say that out loud. So I just stood there watching this kid I traumatized sit alone. Connor looked up and saw me. His whole body went stiff, and his eyes got wide. He pulled the book closer to his chest. I cleared my throat and tried to smile, but it felt wrong. I told him I hoped he had a good birthday before things got weird. The words came out flat and awkward. Connor stared at me with those huge, scared eyes that reminded me too much of how Lily looked after her birthday party. He said in this tiny voice that he doesn't like birthdays anymore. Just like that. Simple and honest. He doesn't like birthdays anymore because of what I did. I felt my throat get tight and my eyes started burning. I mumbled something about needing to find the bathroom and left before he could see me cry. We drove home around 8 when Lily started getting tired. She sat in the back seat looking out the window. My wife was driving and I was in the passenger seat. Both of us quiet. Lily broke the silence by asking why Connor seemed so sad now when he used to be fun. She said it in that confused way kids do when they notice something wrong. I turned around to look at her. She was still staring out the window. I told her that sometimes people go through hard times and they need space to feel better. It was the best answer I could come up with. Lily nodded slowly. Then she said, maybe we should give him one of her stuffed animals to help him feel better. She has this collection of stuffed animals she loves, and she wanted to give one to Connor because she knows what it's like to be scared. My chest got tight again. My 7-year-old daughter, who still has nightmares about dogs, wanted to help the cousin I deliberately hurt. She had more kindness in her than I did. That night after Lily went to bed, my wife and I sat in the living room with the TV off. She asked me if I thought what I did was justified. Really justified. Not just in the moment when I was angry, but now after seeing Connor. I sat there for a long time, not saying anything. Part of me still felt Derek deserved it. But another part kept seeing Connor's face when he said he doesn't like birthdays anymore. My wife waited without pushing. I told her I understood the impulse to protect Lily and make Derek feel what we felt. She nodded and said she got that. But then she said she wished I'd talked to her first. I admitted I knew she would have tried to stop me. I knew it was wrong even when I was doing it, which somehow made it worse. The next day, I called my sister. I needed to tell someone the truth without trying to make it sound better. She answered and asked how Thanksgiving went. I told her it was awful. Then I just said it. I told her I deliberately hurt Connor to get revenge on Derek. I said the words out loud for the first time. I explained about buying the voucher and knowing about his fear. Saying it out loud made it real. It wasn't just something that happened or a mistake. It was something I planned. I started crying while I was talking. I told my sister I didn't know how to fix it. She was quiet for a minute. Then she said I can't fix it because the damage is done. Connor is going to remember that party and that voucher for the rest of his life, just like Lily will remember the puppy. But I can choose not to make it worse by pretending it was justified. She said I need to be honest with myself about what kind of person I became. Even if I never say it to Derek, even if the family never knows the full truth, I need to know it and sit with it. Her words made me feel worse but also clearer. Worse because she was right that I couldn't undo it. Clearer because at least someone was being honest with me. The following week, Lily had therapy and it went well. When I picked her up, her therapist asked to talk. She said Lily had spent most of the session talking about feeling bad for other kids who get scared. She told her about a boy at school who's afraid of the dark and how Lily gave him one of her glow sticks. His therapist said this was really good development, that Lily was building emotional intelligence. She said these are signs of healing even though the phobia remains. Lily still can't be near dogs and still checks under her bed every night, but she's learning to use her experience to help others. I sat there listening, and all I could think about was how I used a child's fear as a weapon. Lily was becoming a better person despite her trauma, and I had become worse because of it. A few days later, I was scrolling through social media and saw a post from Derek. He didn't post often, but this post was different. It said Connor was starting therapy for anxiety and asked for supportive thoughts. He didn't mention me or the party or anything specific, but I knew what he was really saying. Connor needed therapy because of what I did to him. The post had comments from relatives saying they'd keep Connor in their thoughts. My mother commented saying she loved Connor. I sat there staring at my phone feeling sick. This was my fault. Connor needed therapy now because I decided revenge was more important than a child's mental health. My brother texted me that afternoon. The message said Derek was playing victim and I shouldn't feel guilty. He said Derek brought it on himself by traumatizing Lily first. He used words like karma and consequences. His message should have made me feel better, but it made me feel worse. I didn't want to be the kind of person who needed reassurance that hurting a kid was okay. I realized my brother's support was actually making it easier for me to avoid accountability. As long as people kept telling me Derek deserved it, I could keep pretending I didn't do something horrible to a 7-year-old boy. 3 weeks before Christmas, my mother called. She sounded tired. She said she'd been thinking about the holidays, and she couldn't handle having both Derek and me at the same gathering. The tension was too much, so she decided to do separate celebrations this year. I could come Christmas Eve with Lily and my wife. Derek would get Christmas Day with Connor and his wife. She was splitting the family officially. I told her I understood, even though it made my chest hurt. She said she hoped it was temporary, but we both knew that probably wasn't true. Some things don't heal. Christmas was going to be different now, split down the middle. Lily came home from school a few days later and found me in the kitchen. She dropped her backpack and asked why we weren't doing big family Christmas this year. I stopped what I was doing and turned to face her. I told her that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that take time to work through. She stood there with those big worried eyes and asked if it was because of her birthday party. My heart sank watching her connect the dots. She said maybe if she hadn't been so scared of the puppy, everyone would still be together. I knelt down next to her and took her hands. I told her firmly that none of this was her fault. I said her fear of dogs was real and valid. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. Even as I said the words, I knew the truth was more complicated. Lily's birthday party was just the beginning. I was the one who escalated everything by going after Connor. I was the one who turned a family argument into something that split everyone apart. Lily didn't cause this mess. I did when I decided revenge mattered more than being a good person. Christmas Eve arrived, and we drove to my mother's house for our small gathering. Just us, my wife, my sister, and my mom. No big crowd, no chaos, no Derek. We ate dinner and opened presents. Lily seemed happy enough playing with her new toys. After we cleaned up, my mother pulled me aside. She looked tired and sad. She said she knew what I did to Connor. Her voice was quiet, not angry. She just said she was disappointed that I let my anger turn me into someone who hurts children. No yelling, no big lecture. Just those words about being disappointed. It cut deeper than any argument. I tried to explain that Derek showed no remorse for what he did to Lily. My mother nodded and said that was true, but it didn't justify what I did to Connor. She said 2 wrongs don't make a right. Even though I'm a grown man with a child of my own, I felt small. She didn't raise her voice once. She just looked at me with this sad expression. We went back to the living room and finished the evening, but her words stayed with me. New Year's came and went without celebration. We stayed home and watched movies with Lily until she fell asleep. My wife and I sat in the quiet house after midnight, not really talking. I found myself thinking about what kind of person I wanted to be this year. I couldn't undo what I did to Connor. That damage was permanent. But I could stop lying to myself about it being justified. I could stop pretending Derek being terrible first made my actions okay. I spent the first week of January sitting with that uncomfortable truth. Lily woke me up one night in mid-January. She was crying and shaking. Another nightmare about dogs. I brought her into our bed and held her until she calmed down. She asked me if Connor had nightmares too. I told her probably yes. She was quiet, then said, "We should tell him it gets a little better with time." My 7-year-old daughter was showing more compassion than I had managed. She was thinking about Connor's feelings while I'd been focused on hurting him. I told her that was really kind, and maybe someday we could tell him that. February brought Lily's therapy check-in. Her therapist said she'd made significant progress despite the major setback from her birthday. She said Lily's coping strategies were improving. She mentioned that having family support and validation had been crucial for her healing. Knowing people believed her and didn't dismiss her phobia made her feel safe enough to work on it. I thought about Connor and wondered if Derek was giving him that same support. I asked the therapist a hypothetical question about kids whose trauma gets dismissed by family. She explained that invalidation often causes more lasting damage than the initial fear itself. When kids aren't believed or are told their fear is silly, they learn they can't trust their own feelings. The fear becomes wrapped up in shame, making it harder to heal. I sat there thinking about how Derek's dismissal of Lily's phobia made everything worse. But then I realized I did the same thing to Connor. I didn't dismiss his fear. I weaponized it. I took something that scared him and used it as a weapon on purpose. That understanding settled heavy in my chest. Dismissing someone's fear is bad, but using their fear against them might be worse. At least dismissal comes from ignorance. What I did came from deliberate cruelty. I knew exactly how scared Connor would be, and I gave him that voucher anyway. I sat in my car outside the therapist's office for 20 minutes after the appointment, just staring at nothing. March brought warmer weather, and my aunt called to chat about family stuff. She mentioned Connor was doing better in therapy and seemed less anxious during the day, but then she said Connor refused to go to any more birthday parties, even though he used to love them. His friends kept inviting him, but Connor would start crying whenever Derek brought it up. My aunt said the party had ruined something Connor loved. Hearing that made my stomach twist. I'd taken away something that brought Connor joy, something that made him feel special. The voucher scared him for one moment, but I'd destroyed his relationship with birthdays. That felt heavier than anything else. A distant relative died in April, and the whole family had to attend the funeral. I knew Derek would be there. I dressed Lily in her nice clothes and told her we'd probably see Connor, but to just be polite. The funeral home was crowded, and I spotted Derek across the room with Connor pressed against his side. Connor looked smaller, with his hair cut shorter. Derek had his arm around Connor's shoulders and kept glancing down every few seconds. I watched them during the service and saw how Derek's hand never left Connor's back, how he leaned down to whisper reassurances when Connor shifted nervously. It was the exact same way I stood with Lily at family events, the same protective stance. We were doing the same thing for our kids. Seeing that made something uncomfortable settle in my chest. After the service, everyone gathered in the church basement. Several relatives cornered me and started talking about how sad it was that Derek and I weren't speaking. My uncle said family was too important to let disagreements tear us apart. Another cousin suggested we sit down and talk it through. They kept using words like reconciliation and forgiveness, but none of them had watched their kids suffer. I told them politely that some things couldn't be fixed with a conversation. Derek and I made eye contact once across the crowded room. Neither of us looked away or smiled or nodded. We just looked at each other for a few seconds before turning back. That moment told me everything about where we stood. My mother called the next week and suggested family counseling for all of us together. She said Connor and Lily deserved to have their family back. I told her I'd think about it, but 2 days later she called back frustrated. Derek had refused to participate if I was going to be there. He told my mother he couldn't sit in a room with someone who deliberately hurt his son. My mother asked if I would go without Derek, but I said no. I told her some family rifts don't heal. She was quiet for a long time before agreeing. Connor finished second grade in June, and his teacher sent home a note. The note said Connor was kind to other students and always helped kids who were struggling. It mentioned his empathy had improved a lot over the year. His teacher wrote that Connor showed patience, especially with kids who were scared or upset. Reading that made me think about how Connor was growing into a good person despite what happened. His fear of the dark was still there and probably always would be, but he'd learned he could live with his fear. My mother hosted a barbecue in July and everyone was invited. I almost didn't go because I knew Derek would be there. But Lily wanted to see her cousins, and I didn't want to keep her away. We showed up around noon and I immediately scanned the backyard. I spotted Connor near the pool talking with 2 younger cousins. He was smiling and gesturing. For a second he looked confident, but then he glanced toward the patio and saw me watching. His smile disappeared completely. He stopped talking and moved away, putting more distance between us. The younger cousins followed him, confused. I understood in that moment that I would always be the person who scared him on purpose. It didn't matter how much time passed. When he looked at me, he would remember the voucher and the party and the feeling of being terrified. I'd permanently changed how he saw me. Derek and I didn't speak at the barbecue, but we'd developed this unspoken system. He claimed the patio area. I stayed by the pool. When he moved toward the dessert table, I went inside. We timed our movements to avoid being in the same space. Other relatives noticed and tried to casually bring us together, but we always found excuses. It was exhausting keeping track of where Derek was. That night after we got home, my wife sat down next to me. She said she was proud of how I'd handled everything over the past months. I started to interrupt, but she kept going. She said she knew the original action was wrong, but watching me sit with the discomfort instead of justifying it showed real growth. She said a lot of people would have kept insisting they were right. But I'd been honest about feeling guilty, about recognizing I'd hurt Connor on purpose. Her support meant everything, even though I still felt guilty most days. Some nights, I still lay awake thinking about Connor's face and wondering if I'd become the kind of person I never wanted to be. A few weeks later, Lily came into my bedroom at night when she was supposed to be sleeping. She climbed onto the bed and asked if I was sad that we don't see Connor anymore. The question caught me off guard because I didn't realize she'd noticed. I told her honestly that yes, I was sad about it. She was quiet, then said maybe when they're older, they could be friends again. She said kids at school sometimes fight and stop being friends, but then later they make up. Her hope for future healing reminded me that kids are more resilient than adults. They don't hold on to anger the same way. Maybe Lily and Connor would find a way back to each other someday, even if Derek and I never did. I hugged her and told her that was a nice thought. I ran into Derek's wife at the grocery store in August. We both froze when we saw each other in the cereal aisle, then had this awkward moment. She nodded and I nodded back, and somehow that turned into a brief conversation. She mentioned Connor still had nightmares sometimes. Said it casually, but I knew she was telling me on purpose. I told her Lily had nightmares too, still checked under her bed every night. We stood there with our shopping carts, 2 parents whose kids both suffered. Neither of us caused our kids' original fears, but the adults made everything worse. She said she hoped both kids would be okay eventually, and I agreed. Then we went separate ways down different aisles. I stood there staring at cereal boxes, feeling the full weight of everything. Summer ended with Lily starting second grade and Connor beginning third. A full year had passed since the puppy disaster. I found myself marking time that way now, measuring events as before or after that moment. Both kids were still in therapy every week. Lily's therapist said she was making progress, but the phobia itself hadn't gone away. She still checked for dogs constantly and panicked at unexpected barking. Connor was apparently doing similar work with his therapist. My aunt mentioned it once during a phone call, her voice careful. The family remained split. Some relatives thought what I did was justified. Others said two wrongs don't make a right. Most family gatherings had this weird tension where people chose sides without saying it. Derek and I hadn't spoken directly since that awful restaurant meeting. My mother decided to host a birthday party for my father in late August. She made it clear both families were expected. I almost said no, but Lily wanted to go. We showed up early to help set up. Derek arrived an hour later with Connor and his wife. We made eye contact across the yard and both nodded, this stiff acknowledgement. Several relatives commented about how nice it was that we were being civil. My aunt said it was progress, but it felt hollow and forced. I stayed on one side near the grill. Derek stayed on the other side near the dessert table. We moved around each other, maintaining careful distance. The party went on for hours with people eating and talking. Lily played with some younger cousins on the swing set, seeming relaxed. Connor sat with some older kids at a picnic table, quieter than I remembered. Then I saw Lily walk toward the dessert table to get another cookie. Connor was standing there looking at the cake. They ended up next to each other, both reaching for plates. Lily said something about second grade starting next week. Connor said he was nervous about third grade and the harder homework. Their voices were quiet and stilted. Lily asked if he still liked video games. Connor nodded and said he got a new one for his birthday. They talked for maybe 2 minutes total, both looking uncomfortable but trying. Other kids came over and they scattered to different parts of the yard. But I'd seen it happen. This tiny moment of two kids attempting to be normal with each other despite everything. I stood there watching Lily and Connor from opposite sides of the yard, both of them laughing with other cousins now. The guilt hit me fresh and sharp. Protecting your child sometimes means becoming someone you don't recognize, someone capable of cruelty. I didn't regret defending Lily's boundaries or making Derek understand her pain, but I'd always carry the knowledge that I deliberately hurt a 7-year-old boy to teach his father a lesson. Connor's crying at that party would live in my memory, right next to Lily's screaming at hers. Two sounds of childhood terror I couldn't undo. The family had learned to function around the damage, finding ways to exist in the same spaces without direct conflict. Maybe that was the best any of us could hope for. Lily and Connor might heal faster than the adults. Their brief conversation proved kids don't hold on to anger like we do, but the cost would follow us for years, shaping how we showed up at family events and who we trusted and what we were willing to do when someone hurt the people we loved. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.